Chapter 34 Cost of Compromise. Hariel. Ignoring the nippy chill in the air, Hariel and Hagrid strolled from the Great Sept to the King's Square, arguing the pros and cons of using the English flag as a coat of arms. Why not use it? I'm from West Country, born and raised in the Forest of Dean. And it's not complicated either, is it? A white field with a red cross. It will be bloody hard for anyone to get that wrong. And haven't you spent most of your life in Scotland? Well, yeah. Pick what you want, it's your coat of arms, Hagrid. Though it feels slightly like you're declaring yourself England with that one. Lord of England, Got a nice ring to it. Hariel chuckled. They turned off onto the Dragon's Way, a long road with the Red Keep awaiting at its far end. There were a few hours between the ceremony and the feast, so when Hariel and Hagrid passed the gates, they made a stop by the kennels. Neither had been able to walk and feed Fang with how busy they'd been since dawn. Instead, they'd left him with the hunting hounds of the Red Keep under the watch of Kennel Master Corp. For having a name like Fang, there ain't much bite in him, is there? Kennel Master Corp laughed. There was some barking while the hounds figured out how much Fang lived up to his name, but he submitted and let the rest boss him around, and was accepted fine. For bloody coward, Hagrid said, tone both exasperated and affectionate. Fang pushed his head into Hariel's stomach, groaning contentedly when receiving the ear scratches he was after. The boarhound seemed eager to leave already, but he still had to get through the reception. It was by the kennels Hariel was intercepted by Aemond, who wanted a word. Knowing they needed to talk, she left Hagrid with the hounds, but quickly figured she might have been better off staying behind in the doghouse. As Aemond escorted her into the castle and to a private solar to talk, she noticed his bright mood from earlier had been replaced with a neutral mask of politeness. So he talked with Sir Otto. After Princess Rhaenyra accepted the marriage pact so easily, Hariel had foolishly hoped Aemond would too. My grandfather informed me about a contract. Aemond kept a self-contained demeanor, something he only bothered with when he was holding in anger, so Hariel wasn't shocked when he started speaking in Valyrian. This was better kept private, and though several knew Valyrian within his castle, there were far less than those who knew Common Tongue. About the contract? He wet his lips, peering briefly out of the window and back. Aye. What of it? Aemond's hand fisted. Hagrid refused to agree unless some clauses were included. We wouldn't have demanded them if they weren't important, Hale reminded him. Do you have any idea what you've done? Aemond's composure broke. The demands you put forth strips our marriage of influence, Hariel. You've weakened our alliance. The sibling clause is forcing me to denounce our child, categorize them as less Targaryen than those born from my siblings. With that stipulation, Daeron's children will be viewed as having cleaner dragon blood than mine own. What? Hariel blinked, utterly stumped. Because Lady Aline has Valyrian blood? No, because a child of Daeron's won't be known as not Targaryen enough to continue the ancient traditions of our house. You mean because they can't practice sibling incest? The contract denounces me, Hariel. It makes our line the weak bloodline, the one unworthy of following our ancient traditions. It makes a fool of my heritage, Hariel. It finally clicked. Hariel had already been aware, but hadn't anticipated he'd react this strongly. He knew how she felt about incest, so how could he be so shocked? She'd assumed Aemond would take it better than Rhaenyra, but she'd underestimated how important political clout was. This wasn't about what she'd asked for, it was her methods. Her contract stipulation weakened Aemond's standing with the crown, though to ensure the incest traditions didn't become part of her legacy, having less influence and a weaker claim to the throne was a sacrifice Hariel was willing to make. Was he, though? How the faith allowed Targaryen siblings to marry and procreate with each other was politically significant. The faith of the Seven accepted their blood as superior, just as they themselves believed. This was all about blood purity, and how their incest kept their Valyrian blood clean to bond with dragons. But it went hand in hand with claims they weren't affected by incest the way lesser humans were. That was why the faith allowed it despite condemning incest as a sin even in other Valyrian houses like the Velaryons and Celticars. It was a status thing, a born trait rising them above small folk and nobles alike, and they were fully convinced they were biologically superior themselves. But Hariel had no idea how Aemond had failed to see the sign of deterioration littered throughout his family tree, both the long dead ones and those alive. Had he not noticed Prince Daemon was one whack on the head from being unhinged? Not registered how alarmingly many women with Targaryen blood died in childbed? The death rates were off the charts, far more than amongst the small folk who had to struggle with far harsher lives and less food. Yet the birthing commoners survived better and stronger than even pampered queens of Westeros did. But no, the warning bells were ignored as long as his child came out looking appropriately albino. For someone so quick in making judgment on genetics in Rhaenyra's children, had Aemond never wondered why Aegon the Conqueror himself married 2 women, yet didn't see his first child born before he was 34? King Aegon I was 18 when he married his 20-year-old sister Visenya, and 2 years later he married Rhaenys when she turned 18. Hariel had done the maths. That meant it took 16 years between his marriage to Queen Rhaenys before she got pregnant with his first and only child, and 21 years between marrying Queen Visenya until they had a kid. Queen Rhaenys was 33 when Aenys was born, while Queen Visenya had been 41 when she gave birth to Maegor, which was ridiculously late to wait with children in Westeros and recklessly risky. Did Aemond not find that peculiar, when there wasn't a single case of documented miscarriages for either of his sister wives? While Aegon I only had 2 children despite living into his 60s? Didn't that hint of some infertility problems? And Hagrid said impotence was an infliction known to be connected with incest. Princess Rhaenyra was suspected of having fertility problems when it took her 2 years between marrying Sir Laenor until she was pregnant with her first child. But it seemed no one spoke a word when it took Aegon I decades to impregnate his first wife. Most sooner blamed his sisters as the problem, but only by blatantly ignoring that Aegon was the shared link, which they did. Or blamed this curiously long gap on the conquest of Westeros getting in the way, conveniently overlooking how Aegon I fought alongside his wives. Normally siring an heir became more important in times of war, especially when they were the last of their house, and access to his wives wasn't an issue for Aegon I the way it was for other lords fighting far away from home. It would be impossible to prove at this point, but Hariel honestly wouldn't be shocked if Queen Rhaenys and Queen Visenya didn't pull a Rhaenyra, and secretly got pregnant with their lovers when their brother husband couldn't provide heirs. There'd even been rumors that courted Queen Rhaenys' child Aenys I, Aemond's kingly great-grandfather himself, was a bastard. The rumors of bastardy was hushed up once Aenys' dragon egg hatched. That achievement had rebuffed any claims of bastardy during the conquest, but the same thing was considered insufficient proof these days, or Rhaenyra's children wouldn't be struggling with rumors of bastardy. Because if Jace, Luke and Joffrey truly were the children of Harwin Strong, that obviously meant that hatching an egg and bonding with dragons proved nothing. Hariel stepped back, arms crossed. Incest may help your dragon bonds as you claim, but it hurts my magic, Aemond. Your ancient Valyrian traditions would see the magic of my heritage snuffed out within a couple generations. And while we're on the subject, have you considered if your house had been lighter on the incest, maybe the Targaryens would still have its magic of old? We had no choice but to force the issue. You did have a choice though. The 2 of us could have come to an agreement privately, without having it fucking announced to the masses. How short-sighted can you be? I swear, you're politically clueless, the both of you, but now... Stop it. House Targaryen already tricked Hagrid and I with unspecified agreements before. Well, you got your way. You won, I'm marrying you. But you think I've learned nothing? Aemond was stubborn, but only on the things he truly disagreed on, and the incest practices was not one of those. She knew Aemond would yield if his family pressured for any children of theirs to marry each other, and there was little Hariel could do to prevent that legally, or in the eyes of the faith, not without that contract. Then there was that possibility Hariel could die, and what then? Her children would be raised by Targaryens alone, and she didn't entrust them to respect her wishes. But with a contract, Hagrid would have the means to keep protecting them. Flimsy though mere letters on parchments were once the Targaryen decided something in the law didn't suit their personal situation. Do you think it was fun arguing this with Sir Otto? Putting it in writing because I don't trust it'll be upheld otherwise? Do you think I wouldn't prefer to solve this privately with you? But after the stunt your family pulled with my ward situation, it's not negotiable, Aemond. Accept the terms. If you don't, fine. Do as you please. Make your children marry each other. Prove to the realm how pure their Valyrian blood is, and you won't hear a single objection from me. Because in such a scenario, your children will not be the same as mine. It was diabolical Hariel kept having to argue this. First Sir Otto and now Aemond. They'd barely been betrothed for a few hours, and already they were shouting about how to raise the kids. Sure, they had come a long way since the word betrothal made her blush and stutter only months ago, but this was getting ridiculous. There were other ways to go about this. Maybe I would have if you gave me a warning. Sir Otto pushed to get our betrothal secured as fast as possible though, which didn't leave us a lot of time, did it? Aemond's nostrils flared as he exhaled. That's not how it'll be received. What will the court care about the negotiations happening in quick succession? That's the way of all haggling. Only the result matters. And the stipulations you demanded makes you come off as presumptuous, at worst bordering on sacrilegious. You do not speak with the voice of the faith of the Seven, Hariel. The faith would accept a child of mine as true blood of the dragon. I knew you would oppose the practice and I was willing to discuss it with you. But with this move you've harmed the strength of our marriage and any children's future prospects. Their validity, their Targaryen identity will be damaged by your actions. Then you tried pushing for a daughter to inherit? Not to mention the age restrictions. When people hear of this, they'll take it as confirmation the rumors about you are true. What rumors? She demanded. I don't agree with it, but I've caught a few remarks. Aemond pursed his lips. Your foreign customs and the way you've made demands of the crown has made some view you as... As what? Aemond sighed and said it plainly. A shrew. A shrew? A shrew? Hale exclaimed, but forced her temper down before she gave more credence to such lies. Shrews were an insulting term for temperamental, opinionated, and unlikable women. On what grounds am I a shrew? For not wanting my line to suffer needlessly? For waiting until I'm 7 and 10 to marry because I don't want to die in childbed? I don't disagree with you. The Maesters confirmed that childbirth is more dangerous for both mother and child the younger the mother is. Aemond's expression was blank. But others don't care for your reasons, only for how you present yourself. And it's been mentioned that you're never satisfied and keep demanding more. That you're prying into stately affairs that is none of your business, especially of late. By whom? By Prince Aegon? Hale could easily picture Aegon calling her a shrew, because he said similar things to all women who managed to avoid sleeping with him. So excusing Hale's disinterest in him as her being a shrew was precisely Prince Aegon's style of defending his wounded ego. She could especially see him say it now, with Bella agreeing to marry him despite being 12, like she had a fucking choice, while Hariel was arrogant enough to delay her marriage even when it went against the wishes of the crown. In other cases, she'd be expected to bend over and let them walk over her. She couldn't even entirely blame them the misconception. It's what they'd been doing until a little trip to the north. Though even now they kept proving any generosity was only accessible on the conditions she followed their restrictions and ultimatums. Others, Aemond said tightly. You've heard it too. Don't you remember what Lord Larys insinuated about you to my grandfather? There are limits to the whispers my family and I can stop. Obviously. Fewer gossiped about more than the royals, and especially the females. The king seemed powerless to stop any whispering of either Rhaenyra's rumored infidelity or Helena's peculiar behavior with insects. The only one with a clean reputation was Queen Alicent, and she was so strictly composed even Aunt Petunia would look like a slob in comparison. Hariel would not have a reputation like Alicent Hightower though. It was impossible as a witch, a dragon rider, a foreigner, and a less than devout attitude. She didn't believe in the Seven and people could tell. And then there's... I could understand the protection of your bloodline. Without you there is no chance of your magic passing on. But I've come to question whether it's a tool you're using as a... She waited expectantly for him to finish while simmering rage coursed through her body. It felt like any detail might set it off and then she'd boil over with no way to reel it back in. He looked away, his rigidness reminding her of an animated statue. And An excuse. Ariel blinked. That wasn't the direction she'd assumed he'd go. An excuse? For what? 6 and 10 is a safe age for women to marry, but you're demanding 7 and 10. And now you're pushing it further, delaying our marriage until I'm of age as well. Is that a problem? When will your excuses cease? Eamon's eyes bored into hers, making her think of icy fire. Why request it? It's absolutely inconsequential. It's a few moons after you've come of age. So I must wonder if an excuse to... You have misjudged my intentions, Eamon. It's not to push back our wedding because I don't want it. Ariel hesitated. Like the other clause, it's not truly about us. I mean, you and me, as we are. It's about any children we might have. It's not ideal for a child to have a father who's also a child himself. But I'm not a child, Eamon hissed, so low it was barely above a reverberating rasp. How can you still view me as that useless twat from Driftmark who poked the sleeping dragon? I'm the rider of Vermithor, the mount of the old king. I'm dedicated to my duties, far more than Aegon is who's older than you are, than Jace. I excel in history, poetry, geography, mathematics, and training at arms. Anything I put my mind to. You've achieved much for your age, Eamon, but it doesn't change your age. Do you still feel the same as you did 2 years ago, Eamon? That's not... Eamon blinked repeatedly, and despite being dressed in his nicest Targaryen-themed attire, ironically, he looked more the confused 14-year-old than ever. Do you? Ariel pressed. I was a dragon rider 2 years ago as well. You were a prince too, but that's not what I asked. Do you or do you not feel older compared to the person you were a couple years ago? A little, but I was a child then. In a couple years you'll think the same of whom you are today. Ariel cut him off. I feel older now than I did at 4 and 10, and I'm certain you will too. I only wish for you to have the same opportunity I did, as your brother Aegon and sisters have enjoyed. Allowing you to come of age is not something I'm trying to take away. I'm trying to give you some freedom before you're burdened with responsibilities which will bring a finality to your youth. The things you take interest in will be pushed aside for the reality of politics, governing, new duties, a wife, and eventually children. I wish I could grant the same opportunity for Bela, but I can't. I can protect you though, even if you don't know to ask for it. Her arguments finally seemed to penetrate his thick skull. The tightness in his expression lessened, and Eamon didn't immediately object. So you will not delay further. I won't. Then I can inform my mother we're marrying once my 6th and 10th name day has passed? That took her off guard. It sounded like he'd already set a date. Yes. Her Grace would need to be informed ahead of time. She does. Eamon nodded, and his posture relaxed. Though I wonder, will a few moons make such a difference? He asked, searching her face for something Ariel couldn't guess. I may ask the same of you, Ariel mused. It's only half a year to wait. It's actually a year and a half to wait, Eamon corrected quietly. He'd listened. As you could tell, he'd moved past the worst of his steam. He wouldn't agree with her aloud, but Eamon was left dubious instead of angry, and contemplating instead of insulted. Ariel arched a brow. Used a year and a half wisely then. We're all young ones, or so they tell me. She teased, sensing the argument had abated. Eamon chuckled, his pale gaze becoming amused, and his grin had a sly little lilt to it. And that expression reminded Ariel of what a young prince might do to occupy his time. She backtracked immediately. But not... some of your family, that wasn't permission to... Don't forget you're betrothed to me. Unlikely. And if you assume I won't know if you've cheated... She stuttered fervently, gesturing vaguely to mimic some imaginary woman he might kill time with, while quenching his lusts. But you truly are bloody naive. I'll know, I have ways, and I'll promise you'll regret that... Ariel didn't get further because Aemond kissed her. It could have been a nice surprise. They were betrothed, so it's not as if Ariel wasn't curious to kiss Aemond. She'd often find her mind drifting down that path, wondering what it'd be like, how they would be like. He was to be her husband. But this kiss was really badly timed. Not only because Ariel was still picturing Aemond following the example of the lords who didn't consider it cheating to fuck whores as long as the betrothed or wife didn't know, but because of the literal timing of when he'd acted. Caught up in her frustration, Ariel had been gesturing around, and a split second before Aemond spontaneously leaned down to kiss her, she had already started turning to look in the direction of her wildly gesticulating hand. Next, his lips met the corner of her mouth, more her cheek than her lips, and not just a light grace. Oh no, that would have been easier to brush off. Instead, his mouth pushed firmly onto her cheek, clearly meant to have been a proper kiss. He'd gone for it, and literally missed the target. Ariel froze up, with his mouth on her cheek and his face right in front of hers. Green eyes connected with his equally surprised ones. There was maybe a second of uncertainty, where she desperately wondered if there was a way to salvage this. If she was supposed to turn her head to kiss him. If that move would be just an uncomfortable slide of stuff, or if the way to go was to disengage and try again. Because what exactly does one do when a first kiss goes that badly? She'd only kissed once before, and it had been a near magical kiss in her memory. But this was... bloody hell. Aemond reeled back, his face flaring the same shade of red as the dragon on the Targaryen coat of arms. So Ariel wasn't faring any better. Why hadn't the floor opened up and swallowed her whole already? It'd be a mercy. Aemond? She said. Though when she broke the charged silence with his name, suddenly her jumpy nervousness turned to humor, and next she was giggling. In a blink, what just happened went from mortifying to inexplicably funny, and once the smile was there, it was impossible to get rid of. At least that's how it was to her. Aemond didn't share her amusement, and her laughter only made it worse. He soured as he was prone to whenever his pride was wounded, and quickly fell back to his previous anger, inflamed with bubbling embarrassment. It had only been a bit of bad luck though. There was something comical in how spectacularly bad the timing had been, and how could he fail to notice that? Did Aemond think she turned her head away on purpose? Oh, but what if he did? Aemond whirled around and began pacing fast down the corridor. Aemond, she repeated, fighting down the laugh. But it was hard. Ariel did her best, but it was physically painful to force the smile off her lips. It wouldn't budge. She reached to pull him back, to clarify, but he slipped his arm free of hers easily. The scathing glare on his face dared her dire consequence if she ever spoke of this to a living soul. It seemed it wasn't just Aegon who had a fragile ego about these things. You caught me unawares. It was unfortunately timed, but you know what they say? If at first you don't succeed... She tried to joke, trying to coax him into laughing with her, but it was interpreted by her audience in the worst possible way. Unsuccessful? I'm not inexperienced, Aemond snapped. The others were delighted and honored to have my attention, ardently so. This time Ariel was the one to recoil, the remaining mirth she'd struggle against evaporating. And Aemond wasn't done. You're the one who can't even... Your insolence knows no bounds, does it? Who in the Father's judgment do you think you are to laugh at me? Not someone you'll get to kiss, Ariel spat. It was the final straw. The boiling point was reached and they both turned on their heels and marched away. Ariel's righteous anger took her steadfast down the hall for several steps, before a nagging hesitation slowed her pace. A brief glance over her shoulder saw Aemond turn the corner, his long hair flaring out behind him, and a renewed bout of indignation kept her marching away. Aemond's entitled pride was so damn insufferable! It had been a stupid accident, and instead of letting her explain or fix matters, he jumped straight to insults. So much for his promise to never talk to her like that again. And who the bloody hell were these ardently delighted females Aemond had experience with? He always had his nose stuck in a stupid book, hung out with his dragon or practiced his idiotic swordplay. He was 14! Alright, maybe it wasn't impossible. Certainly Aegon had already sired at least one child by that age, maybe more. But Aemond wasn't like... Ariel felt nausea while her imagination jumped ahead. Because was Aemond so unlike his brother? Truly. Aemond displayed much disappointment towards Aegon's sleazy ways, but mostly if his older brother revealed such publicly, and especially if Aemond himself was the butt of the joke. When it was directed at others though, his tune was quite different there. Maybe the double standards popped up in other places too. He'd been furious when Aegon shamed Helena publicly, his precious favourite sister, but maybe he'd find it acceptable if done against Bella, who he obviously disliked. It made Ariel suspicious of what Aemond did whilst she was at Dragonstone. Though it was frowned upon, men were generally allowed their affairs as they pleased. In certain circles, some were even encouraged to, for the sake of proving to other men how manly they were. And as a pretty prince, Ariel knew Aemond really did have a lot of offers. Whether he'd accepted those offers weren't debatable anymore. She had it of his own mouth, and Aemond had never needed to lie to hurt her before. Her stomach churned heavily. He'd been the one to pursue her! But duty and lust were two different things, weren't they? This was exactly what Septa Mega kept saying. Men have needs, and if their wife couldn't please, they'd go elsewhere. And Ariel had been around Westeros long enough to know it true. As a prince, Aemond wouldn't lack for company whenever they had a spat. Maybe a faithful partner was too much to ask, least of all from a member of House Targaryen. They kicked each other down as much as any others. Just look at today. Rhaenyra's easy acceptance of Ariel's contract made a grim amount of sense now, and Aemond was obviously willing to sacrifice the health of his own children for political clout. The house barely managed to stay loyal to their own kin, so what were her chances? Was Aemond already off kissing one of those other girls? Someone who didn't laugh at the wrong time? There were days Ariel couldn't stand being in Westeros any more than she had the Dursleys. Intently so. Otto's negotiations, Rhaenyra's prying, Baela's wedding, Jace's attitude, Aemond's reaction. It wasn't even supper yet, and already Ariel felt so far removed from everyone else's mindset she might as well be an intruding alien. She literally was! This wasn't even her bloody planet! Aemond's initial reaction to the betrothal had been the only pleasant thing that day, and now that was ruined too. This wedding was cursed, begetting nothing but misery.